We've been waiting 6 years for this and now it's finally here. This is the reMarkable 3 following the iconic reMarkable 2. Sorry, not called the reMarkable 3? Paper Pure? Okay, so this is the reMarkable Paper Pure, the successor of the reMarkable 2, now with the 300 ppi display and a Frontlight. What do you mean though, Frontlight? Not 300 ppi? So yeah, not exactly the dream reMarkable 3 many people probably had in mind. But here's the weird part. The Paper Pure is not just bad news. The display, despite the underwhelming resolution, is actually much better than I expected. It's bright, reflective, contrasty, and in the right lighting, it's honestly one of the best looking e-ink displays on the market. But at the same time, it also feels like a weirdly worse replacement in a few important areas. So let's find out if the simple approach still pays off in today's e-ink tablet market. With its boxier build and more defined edges, the Paper Pure follows the same design language as the Paper Pro and Paper Pro Move. And I have to say, I'm not sure that was the right choice here, because that hard plastic body feels a bit cheap. The asymmetrical design is nice though, it gives you a more obvious place to hold the tablet, and in that sense, handling is definitely easier than on the Paper Pro. And to be clear, the build quality itself is still very good. Nothing feels badly made and nothing creaks. But compared to the reMarkable 2 or the Paper Pro tablets, that original premium charm is definitely gone. The new sleeve, which replaces the usual folio covers, doesn't really help with that impression either. It's also well made, but it adds more bulk than the folios we've seen on other reMarkable tablets. And in a way, it just underlines that the Paper Pure is a different kind of reMarkable device. I only got this one because it was bundled with the Marker Plus and the tablet. But to be frank, this is not really my kind of thing. It looks nice enough and it protects the tablet when carrying it around, but in daily use I much prefer a proper folio that stays attached to the device. So unless you really like sleeves, I probably wouldn't recommend buying this separately. Personally, I'd just wait for an aftermarket folio, which will almost certainly show up at some point. There are also 4 large rubber feet on the back, but for some reason reMarkable chose to go with a different material, rendering them almost useless in stabilizing the tablet. The good news is that the reMarkable Paper Pure is very light. At just 360 grams, it's among the lightest 10-inch e-ink note-taking tablets, and that definitely helps when using it handheld. reMarkable also did a really good job matching the gray bezel color to the display's background. That sounds like a tiny detail, but it makes the whole front look very cohesive, because the bezel doesn't visually fight the screen. Especially with such a bright e-ink background, the transition from frame to display looks calm and harmonious, and that fits the whole Paper Pure idea well. I also really appreciate the screws on the back cover. More specifically, I appreciate what they allow. Access to the 3820 mAh battery and the other internals. For a device that should ideally last for many years, that's genuinely nice to see. The screws are easy to remove, which is nice. But that doesn't mean the back cover just comes off effortlessly. There are clips all around the frame, and reMarkable also uses a bit of adhesive in 2 spots to hold it in place. So the battery access is still repair friendly compared to a fully sealed device, but it's not quite as simple as remove the screws and lift the cover. You still need to be a bit careful when opening it. The pen attaches magnetically to the side and charges there automatically. And when you remove the back cover, you can actually see the charging coil mounted on the inside, which is a nice little reminder that this is no longer the passive EMR setup from the reMarkable 2. For most people, I don't think that will be a huge issue. reMarkable's implementation is generally good. One small annoyance I ran into was the pen connection. During the initial setup, right out of the box, it only worked after a couple of tries. And when I later switched the device into developer mode, the same thing happened again. Not a huge deal, and once the pen was detected, it worked normally. But for a device that's supposed to feel this seamless and frictionless, that kind of setup hiccup is a bit annoying. But once that part is done, writing feels precise, responsive, and natural. The main downside is still the slightly wobbly diagonal lines that usually happen with this type of capacitive pen input. For normal handwritten notes, it's not something I would worry about too much. But if you sketch or draw a lot, it is worth keeping in mind. The Paper Pure comes with the regular marker without an eraser on top. If you want the Marker Plus with the built-in eraser, that costs extra. And I'll come back to pricing later. reMarkable claims a pen latency of 21 milliseconds, and based on my measurements, at 19 milliseconds, it's actually slightly quicker. It's a good result, and the writing experience feels smooth. But at the same time, it's no longer especially impressive. The reMarkable 2 already reached roughly the same level 6 years ago, and some newer devices like the Kindle Scribe are twice as fast. So writing still feels good, but it no longer feels ahead of the market. Same as the Paper Pro models, the Paper Pure also uses a textured front glass. That means there is a noticeable tapping sound when the hard pen tip touches the display. I found this annoying when the Paper Pro first launched, but over time I mostly got used to it. Still, compared to the quieter, softer feel of the reMarkable 2, the Paper Pure feels and sounds quite different. There is also a bit less friction than on the older plastic paper-like surface of the reMarkable 2. It's still pleasant to write on, but it does not recreate the exact same resistance. When it comes to the display, the reMarkable Paper Pure is both a really nice surprise and still somehow a bit frustrating. Let's start with the good part, because honestly, this screen looks better than I expected. The Paper Pure uses a 10.3-inch e-ink Carta 1300 display, and the standout feature here is not the resolution, but the reflectivity. This is one of the brightest e-ink tablet displays I've measured so far when it comes to the actual background of the panel. Using my spectrophotometer, I measured an L-star value of around 68 to 69. L-star basically describes lightness, so the higher the number, the brighter the surface appears. And that is a very strong result. In fact, the only e-ink tablet I've measured with an even slightly brighter background is the Viwood's AI paper, at around 69 to 70. The Paper Pure has this clean, bright background with dark blacks, and that gives it genuinely good readability in decent lighting. It looks crisp enough, contrast is strong, and the whole screen has a very pleasant paper-like appearance. But to be fair, the reMarkable 2 also had a very good background brightness of 67 to 68, but noticeably weaker black levels, and as a result, worse contrast levels. So I do understand the trade-off reMarkable made here. By skipping the Frontlight layer and keeping the pen closer to the e-ink panel, you get a display that reflects ambient light really well and keeps that very direct writing feel. And most of the time, in good lighting, that actually works nicely. But, and this is where the frustration comes in, the resolution is still only 226 ppi. It's not that the Paper Pure looks bad. Text is readable, handwriting looks fine, and the bright background helps the overall impression a lot. But once you compare it directly to a 300 ppi panel, the difference is definitely there. Even with these textured paper-like screen surfaces slightly softening the image on most e-ink note-taking devices, you can still see the extra sharpness of 300 ppi with the naked eye, especially in smaller text, fine UI elements, and detailed PDFs. And that's why the Viwood's AI paper is such an annoying comparison for reMarkable here, because that device manages to have both a very bright display background and a 300 ppi resolution. So while the Paper Pure's reflectivity is excellent, it doesn't completely excuse the lower resolution. It makes the compromise easier to accept, but it doesn't make it disappear. And then there's the missing Frontlight. Now again, I understand the idea. No Frontlight usually means a smaller pen-to-pixel distance, fewer layers above the e-ink panel, and potentially a more paper-like look. And on the Paper Pure, that works. The writing feels very direct, and the small pen-to-pixel distance is genuinely nice to have. But I'm still not entirely convinced that this trade-off is worth it for most people. Because as bright and reflective as this screen is, a device with a Frontlight can match that perceived background brightness very easily by just turning up the light a tiny bit. You don't need to blast the LEDs, even a low Frontlight setting can compensate for weaker ambient lighting and make the screen much more flexible. And that is the key difference. The Paper Pure looks great when the lighting around you is good, but once the room gets dimmer, readability drops with the environment. That's just how reflective displays work. A Frontlight gives you control. Without one, you're always dependent on the light around you, and that feels especially strange because reMarkable already solved a big part of this issue on the Paper Pro line. According to reMarkable's own numbers, the difference in pen-to-pixel distance between the Paper Pure and the Paper Pro is just 0.08 millimeters. That's about the thickness of a sheet of paper, or somewhere in the range of a human hair. To be clear, the Paper Pure's pen-to-pixel distance of just 0.84 millimeters is great. The bezel casts only a very small shadow onto the screen, and visually, that makes the whole writing experience feel very direct. But when holding the Paper Pure and Paper Pro side by side, looking at those shadows, it's almost impossible to spot a meaningful difference. Same when looking more closely while using the pen. The Paper Pure may technically be closer, but practically the difference is tiny. So to me, the smarter trade-off would have been to give the Paper Pure a Frontlight as well, accept that almost negligible increase in pen-to-pixel distance, and make the device much more usable in more situations. Still, I don't want to undersell the screen. In good lighting, it performs incredibly well. The bright background is a genuine strength compared to others, contrast is great, and the display has a clean, pleasant look that suits the whole reMarkable idea very nicely. Ghosting is another area where the PaperPure performs well. Carta 1300 displays can show a lot of ghosting, but reMarkable has it under control here. In case you don't know the term, ghosting is when faint traces of previously shown content are still visible after changing the page. That's normal for e-ink because there are actual particles being moved around inside the display to generate an image, and some of them can temporarily remain where they were. You can still sometimes see ghosting after certain actions, but compared to many other Carta 1300 devices I've tested, the PaperPure handles ghosting noticeably better. So overall, this is a better display than the specs alone suggest. The reflectivity is excellent, the background is surprisingly bright, contrast is good, and ghosting is well controlled. But at the same time, the lower resolution and missing Frontlight make it feel more compromised than it needed to be, especially because we know that bright 300 ppi screens exist and because reMarkable itself has shown that adding a Frontlight doesn't have to ruin the writing experience. Performance, on the other hand, is an upgrade over the reMarkable 2 and because of the quicker e-ink technology also over the PaperPro. The PaperPure uses a Cortex-A55 based dual-core processor with 2 gigs of RAM, basically the same hardware as the PaperPro Move. And for what this device is trying to do, that's more than enough. Opening notebooks, switching pages, navigating folders, and moving through the interface all feel quick. And that matters because the software is still built around the same reMarkable idea. Notes first, distractions basically never. The interface is clean, minimal, and extremely easy to understand. No app store, no widgets, no deep settings rabbit holes, you open a notebook and start writing. reMarkable still does that kind of focused experience extremely well. But the trade-off is also the same as before. Compared to books or Supernote, reMarkable's software is still limited. And even Amazon is slowly catching up with the Kindle Scribe, gradually adding features that bring it closer to the basic reMarkable workflow. You do get folders, tags, layers, templates, and favorites, and those basics are nicely implemented. Layers are useful for separating content, and tags help create structure beyond folders. But if you want deep note linking, advanced document workflows, split-screen multitasking, audio recordings, app support, or lots of customization, this is not that kind of device. At least not if you expect these things out of the box, because with a bit of tinkering, some customizations are still possible. If you want an e-ink productivity tablet, the PaperPure isn't it, even though there's now a new meeting notes feature, which I'll come back to in a moment. Where reMarkable shines is the writing toolset. The ballpoint pen, fineliner, marker, pencil, mechanical pencil, paintbrush, and other tools all feel carefully tuned. Pressure and tilt sensitivity are supported where they make sense, and especially the pencil tool still feels very natural. This is one of the areas where reMarkable's restraint works in its favor. You don't get endless settings, but the tools are tuned well enough that you often don't miss them. Templates are also very good. You get lined paper, grids, planners, checklists, music sheets, storyboards, and plenty of other clean, very well-designed layouts. And infinite scroll is still one of my favorite reMarkable notebook features because it lets you continue a thought downward without running out of space. So as I said, the PaperPure also gets the newer meeting notes feature. It gives you the option to quickly create a new notebook inside the meeting notes folder, which puts the basic info from a Google Calendar or Outlook 365 calendar event in typed text on the notebooks page. But that's it. It doesn't remind you of upcoming meetings, isn't really a full calendar sync, and just shows the upcoming appointments in this pop-up clicking the icon on the home screen. So it's not a huge feature, but still nice to have. My issue with it is actually something else. Same as other integrations, this requires an active Connect subscription. And to be honest, I really dislike that approach to hide certain features behind a paywall. reMarkable subscription now costs $40 or euros per year. On its own, that's not a huge amount of money, but it's still frustrating because some features behind that subscription feel like they should simply be part of a note-taking tablet. The meeting notes or additional templates aren't even the worst parts of it. The most annoying example is handwriting search. For a device built around handwritten notes, search is not a luxury feature. It's one of the main reasons digital handwriting becomes useful long-term. When you only have a few notebooks, finding things manually is still easy enough. But after months or years of notes, scripts, study material, ideas, lists, and random thoughts, that changes quickly. At that point, search becomes the feature that turns a pile of handwritten pages into something manageable, especially together with folders and tags. So locking it behind a subscription just feels like the wrong call on a device like this. But on the Paper Pure, same as on the other reMarkable devices, handwriting search requires the Connect subscription. And indexing also depends on an internet connection. So this is not a fully local feature. That combination is honestly disappointing, especially because many competitors either include handwriting search for free or handle it more directly on the device. And since the Paper Pure's price advantage over most competitors isn't that big to begin with, 1 to 3 years of Connect can shrink it quickly or wipe it out entirely. Syncing itself works well. reMarkable's tablet, desktop app, and mobile app feel polished and consistent, and notes show up reliably. So that's without a doubt one of the biggest strengths of the reMarkable workflow. PDF handling is okay, because the hardware is faster now. It's a lot better than on the reMarkable 2. Opening documents, flipping pages, and writing directly on PDFs all work well enough, and direct PDF annotation is still convenient. Import, write, export. For simple workflows, that's fine. But compared to competitors, PDF support is still fairly basic. You don't get advanced viewing modes like column mode, automatic cropping, or specialized academic reading tools like you'll find on something like the Booksco 10.3 Gen 2. So if you regularly work with dense papers, textbooks, scanned documents, or multi-column layouts, this is not the strongest option. And ebook reading is still the weakest part of the software. Yes, you can read EPUB files, and on paper, a 10.3-inch e-ink screen should be great for reading, but reMarkable's EPUB implementation remains bare bones. Formatting options are rather slow and limited, and the overall experience feels far behind even basic dedicated e-readers. You can write directly onto EPUB pages, which sounds great, but EPUBs are reflowable. If you later change font size, margins, or layout, your handwritten notes get misaligned completely. So in practice, EPUB annotation feels pretty fragile. And that's a shame, because better ebook support would improve the value of reMarkable tablets a lot. But the company still treats ebooks like a secondary afterthought. You can improve the reading experience by enabling developer mode and installing CoReader yourself, which is an open source reading app with much more powerful ebook features. And to be fair, thanks to some genuinely impressive community work, the whole process is much simpler now than it used to be. But still, I don't think a device like this should rely on tinkering to get decent reading features. CoReader is great, and I'm glad the option exists, but proper EPUB support is such a basic part of what a 10.3-inch e-ink tablet should offer, that it really shouldn't require developer mode and community software to get there. Battery life at least is decent. reMarkable claims up to 3 weeks with 1 hour of active use per day. And as always, claims like that depend a lot on what active use actually means. So I tested it with my handwriting robot. With continuous handwriting, I got around 11 hours on one charge, which is a good result. It doesn't match the new Kindle Scribe, which still takes the top spot in my writing test at around 16 hours, but 11 hours of non-stop handwriting is still more than enough for normal note-taking and in line with most others in the space. Using the native reading app with the PDF, I measured roughly 27 hours on one charge for reading. That's a bit weaker than the writing performance compared to many competitors, but still okay. Now let's talk about price. The Paper Pure starts at $399 or euros with the base marker. For a 10.3-inch e-ink note-taking tablet, that's a fair price. It's not cheap, but compared to the Paper Pro line, it's much easier to justify. And it makes the Paper Pure the most accessible way into the current reMarkable ecosystem. But the problem is, that's just the starting price. With the Marker Plus and the sleeve, which I honestly wouldn't have gotten if it hadn't been bundled, I paid 488 euros including shipping. And at that point, the value argument changes quite a bit. The Paper Pure suddenly sits much closer to the competition and can even end up more expensive from the start. So yes, the base configuration looks reasonable. But once you want more than that entry-level setup, it stops looking like the great deal it first appears to be. And that's not even factoring in the optional Connect subscription I already mentioned. And since the reMarkable 2 launch, the market has changed a lot. The new Kindle Scribe already starts at a similar price point, and importantly, Amazon offers it both with and without a Frontlight. For casual note-takers, that makes it a serious alternative. The note-taking workflow still isn't as focused as reMarkable's, but Amazon's hardware and reading ecosystem are much stronger. And knowing Amazon, discounts will almost certainly make that comparison even tougher over time. Books is taking a similar approach with the Go 10.3, Gen 2, and the slightly more expensive Frontlit Lumi version. So users actually get a choice with both competitors. Cheaper and more paper-like, or slightly more expensive and more flexible with a Frontlight. And honestly, I think that would have been the smart move for reMarkable as well. Offer the paper pure as it is right now, and add a slightly more expensive version with a Frontlight. Thinking about it, I wouldn't even be surprised if exactly that kind of device is already in the works for a 2027 release. So who's the paper pure actually for? I'd say it's mostly for people who specifically want reMarkable's version of simplicity, not just a simple e-ink tablet, but the reMarkable ecosystem, the clean interface, the focused writing experience, the polished workflow, and the reliable sync. And to be clear, this is a valid reason to buy it. The display also deserves more credit than the spec sheet suggests. Yes, 226 ppi is a bit disappointing in 2026 at this price point, but in day-to-day use, it's honestly also fine. The bright background, strong reflectivity, good contrast, and well-controlled ghosting make it more pleasant to use than I expected. But I'm also not sure how much it matters to most people, because aside from e-ink enthusiasts, I think many users would simply prefer the flexibility of a Frontlight. And the thing is, a Frontlight device can also match the perceived brightness pretty easily by turning up the LEDs just a tiny bit. You don't have to blast the light, and you don't immediately lose that paper-like look. But you do gain the ability to keep the screen readable when the lighting around you gets worse. Yes, the paper pure is also fairly priced by reMarkable standards, but as an overall package, it still feels a bit too expensive for what it offers. Especially when the hardware has clear compromises and such a basic note-taking feature as handwriting search requires an ongoing subscription. And as the long-awaited follow-up to the reMarkable 2, it just doesn't feel like the big step forward I was expecting. But maybe expectations are the thief of joy here, because if you look at the paper pure on its own, it's a perfectly nice e-ink tablet. It's focused, pleasant to use, and I have no doubt that most people who choose it over the alternatives I mentioned, knowing exactly what you're getting, will be happy with it. Like and subscribe if you found this review helpful. Thanks for spending your time watching, and I'll see you in the next one.